Hi, I'm Ryan Samansky, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we've got another video in our series on Leyte Gulf, which is leading up to the 80th anniversary of Leyte Gulf, which we are celebrating on board on Saturday, October 26th, 2024. And we're going to have a lecture on board from 10 in the morning until it was originally going to be until 2 in the afternoon. We just had another speaker sign on, so it's probably going to go until about 3 in the afternoon. So we got this great lineup of speakers. Tickets are $50, but there's only a few of them left at this point. So make sure you get a ticket in the description down below. In today's video, we're going to have what I would call a primer on the Battle of Surigao Strait, because one of the presentations at our symposium is on the Battle of Surigao Strait. It's being hosted by the historians Robert Lundgren and Anthony Tully. Both of them have written books about the battle before. Lundgren wrote The World Wondered about Leyte Gulf. And Tully, of course, wrote the book Surigao Strait, which brought into the office here to get him to sign when he's on board. If you are coming out to the symposium, make sure you bring your books with you so that these guys can sign. We'll have time for that. Some of them may have books to sign. Tully's flying in from Texas, so I'm not sure if he's going to have any on him. But if you happen to have one, be sure to bring it with you. Lundgren and Tully just published a new article on the Battle of Surigao Strait, which actually supersedes some of the things in their two books. There's a link to that article in the description below. That is online. It's available for free. Go check it out. I have started reading it, but I haven't had enough time to finish it, and that's why this video is just going to be a primer on the battle, because there's going to be some new information revealed in that article and some new stuff revealed at the symposium to those of you who come out. The Battle of Surigao Strait is significant because it is the last time that battleships fight other battleships. And it's the last time that that most classic of naval maneuvers, the crossing of the T, was performed. Now, functionally at the battle, it didn't really have an impact. The Americans had such an overwhelming force that crossing the T didn't really make any difference. But if you have an advantage, why squander it? So, for this battle, there are 3 names you need to know: Oldendorf, Coward, and Nishimura. Jesse Oldendorf is the commander of the shore bombardment group that's part of 7th Fleet. He is the American officer in tactical command at the battle. He's the one who sets up his forces and is well regarded as the victor of this engagement. On the other side, we have Admiral Nishimura, who is in command of the Japanese forces who are trying to break through Surigao Strait. And then we have Captain Coward. Captain Coward is the opposite of what his name implies. His destroyer squadron was not even supposed to be there, but knowing there was going to be an engagement without orders, he takes his entire squadron and joins Oldendorf's force for the battle. So the battle itself takes place on the night of October 24th to 25th. The Japanese are coming up from the south as part of their pincer movement on the American invasion force at Leyte Gulf. There are 2 Japanese forces coming from the south. Nishimura has 2 battleships, a heavy cruiser, and some destroyers. And then behind him, Admiral Shima has a couple of heavy cruisers and destroyers to join forces. They're supposed to rendezvous in Leyte Gulf with the center force under Admiral Kurita, with the bulk of the battleships of the Japanese fleet. Because the Japanese are trying to surprise the Americans, they're maintaining radio silence, and that throws their multiple dispersed formations into disarray. Nishimura and Kurita were never going to be able to meet up in Leyte Gulf at the same time, because Kurita had been attacked by air forces at the Sibuyan Sea. Naval air forces, but aircraft at the Sibuyan Sea. He'd turned around and thus was behind schedule. Likewise, Nishimura was supposed to meet with Admiral Shima and turn over control of the force to him, the more senior ranking person. However, that had not happened, And there's been some argument that Nishimura might have pressed forward not just to meet his timetable, which had already been thrown off unbeknownst to him, but also to keep tactical command rather than turning it over to Shima. He actually hit Surigao Strait about 25 miles ahead of Admiral Shima, so about an hour, maybe a little bit over an hour ahead of the other Japanese admiral. Now, of course, the Japanese were not going to achieve surprise. The Americans had detected via aircraft the Japanese fleets on the move, and so Admiral Kinkaid, in charge of 7th Fleet, had sent basically all of his surface forces under Admiral Oldendorf to Surigao Strait to head off the Japanese Southern Force, knowing that Halsey was in the north to block off the Central Force under Kurita. He assumed this was the only threat he had to face. Oldendorf's heavy hitters are primarily older ships. Both his battleships and heavy cruisers are pre-war designs. His battleships, 5 of them are veterans from the Pearl Harbor attack. They were designed during World War I, if not completed during that war. So these are old ships. They've been primarily used for shore bombardment throughout the war, which means they haven't had as much training and practice with naval tactics and firing on enemy ships. However, they've actually had more exercise with their main battery guns than the fast battleships of Lee's force in 3rd Fleet, because they've been using them for shore bombardment throughout the entire war. And so his ships actually achieve really, really tremendous accuracy, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video here. Despite not having much training at surface action tactics, Oldendorf's an experienced admiral. He puts his ships in a line, the oldest tactic known to naval warfare, and he puts them in a line across the mouth of Surigao Strait. The Japanese forces coming through the strait are more or less limited to a line-ahead column. And they would have to get very close to the American ships before they could start to either break out and turn broadside or start to open up their line into their own parallel line of battle. The American force has something like 28 destroyers, close to a dozen cruisers between the heavies and the lights, and then, of course, the 6 battleships. Pennsylvania, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, Maryland, and West Virginia. Again, all of those battleships but Mississippi were present at Pearl Harbor. All of them were damaged at Pearl Harbor. Some of them were sunk there. Mississippi, of course, was still in the Atlantic at this point, but would transition across to the Pacific shortly after the attack. So in many ways, this battle is thought of as poetic justice, that these ships, which had been sunk by the Japanese, are now several years later coming to grips with them in a battle that they really weren't trained or necessarily equipped to fight. While they do have some armor-piercing shells on board, the majority of their magazines are high-capacity shells for shore bombardment. So Oldendorf is extremely aware of the amount of ammunition he has in his magazines. I personally think that too much is made out of the amount of armor-piercing shells on board these ships, particularly after the battle. This is one of the reasons that's brought up that the 7th Fleet battleships could not transition back to the north of Leyte to fight Kurita's Central Force. So I think that there's amount of covering of butts between Kinkaid and Oldendorf versus Halsey with his battleships and who was supposed to be covering that northern entrance. But it is absolutely fair to say that the majority of the shells in these battleships' magazines were high capacity for shore bombardment, and they do fire off a number of their armor-piercing shells against the Japanese battleships. So they do have reduced magazines by the end of the battle. So for the battle itself, it's pretty simple formations on the Japanese side. We've already mentioned that they're basically stuck in a line-ahead formation. Yamashiro is the flagship. Fuso is the other battleship that's there. These two are sister ships. They're World War I designs as well. Just like the American battleships, they've been modernized during the interwar period. They have some early Japanese radar on them, although in these restricted waterways, it doesn't do them a lot of good. Likewise, the American radars are somewhat cluttered by all the island masses around them as well. So both sides have issues with their electronics during these battles, but the American radar is at least a generation ahead of the Japanese radar and is much more sophisticated. And the fire control radars, which are much more line of sight, are less affected by all the islands around them as opposed to the surface search radars that are picking up all these other blocks. For the American formation, Oldendorf has his PT boats attack first. Then he has his two destroyer squadrons basically on either side of the straits, so the Japanese have to run a gauntlet of American destroyers, which they can't really see, silhouetted against the land masses on either side, and then also not being able to pick them up on the radar because of how close they are to the land. So they're running a gauntlet of torpedoes from both the American torpedo boats and destroyers. And realistically, these destroyers do the bulk of the damage right there. They are able to sink Fuso. They put at least 2 torpedoes into her. I'm interested in reading further into this article by Lundgren and Tullys because it includes some information about the wreck site, which has since been discovered. So I'm interested in seeing the ship has turned turtle, so they probably can see the torpedo holes and say how many there are. I know that some accounts say that Fuso breaks in half and sinks, but other accounts had said that she did not, and it seems like the wreck site confirms that the ship sank more or less intact. So Fuso is sunk outright by the torpedoes. Yamashiro is hit, but is able to stay underway. Admiral Nishimura has really lost tactical control of the battle at this point. He doesn't realize that he's lost Fuso entirely, just that she has slowed down behind him. And Fuso sinks a lot quicker than would be normal for a battleship, especially with that few torpedoes hits. His destroyers are pretty well ravaged at that point as well. I believe he makes it to the American battle line with just his flagship Yamashiro, the cruiser Mogami, and a single destroyer. While the American battleships are able to track the Japanese ships from over 20 miles away with their fire control radars, they hold their fire until the range is closed to about 11 or 12 miles as these Japanese ships approach. Now I say the American radar, but it really is specific ships have the most modern radar and get really good pictures. Ships like West Virginia, California, and Tennessee, they have been rebuilt with the most modern fire control systems very similar to what's on Battleship New Jersey. Other ships like Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Mississippi have a slightly older generation of fire control radar, and so much ink has been spilled about them. They fire significantly fewer shells, and there's been a lot of ink spilled about them, thus having worse radar solutions of the Japanese ships. But looking at the American formation where they sail in a line and then have to reverse and come back and then reverse and come back, certain ships' guns are masked during certain parts of the battle, especially the ships at the rear of the formation. And so that may play a part in why some of the ships fire dozens of salvos and some of them don't. In fact, the Lundgren-Tullys article talks about the accuracy of the battleship Maryland. There's been a lot said about West Virginia with her modern fire control system scoring hits on her very first salvo, which is incredibly impressive, and it speaks very highly to the radar fire control system of these ships. But Maryland also scores hits on her early salvos according to this new article, which I'm really interested to see, to finish reading it and find out more about that. So Maryland still has the older style fire control system and is still able to score hits. So this new research is very heavily changing what we know about the battle. So both Yamashiro and Mogami are hit heavily by the 16 and 14-inch guns of the American battle line, in addition to the 8-inch, 6-inch, and 5-inch guns They get a lot of lead thrown at them that day. Yamashiro sinks outright. Mogami and the surviving destroyer try to retreat. And maybe one of the most interesting parts of this battle is, while the Japanese are very much in the dark about where their different forces are, many of the American ships throughout the fleet, remember, they're spread out in task forces all around the Philippines. Some of them are hundreds of miles away, but through a quirk of just meteorology and how radio signals propagate, the communications from the American fleet on the TBS, or talk between ships, really short-range radio system, is able to bounce off of some atmospheric thing, don't ask me how radios work, and make it to many of the other American ships. And so throughout the night, much of the American fleet has relayed this information through their radio rooms over their 1MCs, so that the crews of many of these ships are able to hear basically the play-by-play of Oldendorf's forces. Mississippi fires the last salvo of the battle, making it the last time a battleship shot at another battleship. So, which of the authors in our Leyte Gulf Symposium are you most excited to meet in person? Let us know in the comments section down below if you have any books by any of them. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, subscribing so more people find about us and the channel. Thanks for watching.